My name is Joanna Farrell. I was 31 years old when I learned that betrayal doesn't always arrive with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the middle of an airport terminal before sunrise. The departure boards glowed above us as travelers shuffled through the early morning crowd. It was 5:15 a.m. at Knoxville Regional Airport, and my grandmother, Hazel, stood beside me gripping the handle of an old brown suitcase that had once belonged to my grandfather. Around us, 11 members of our family chatted excitedly about the European vacation we had spent months discussing.
Rome,
Florence,
Paris,
London. 3 weeks together. At least that was what Grandma believed. She wore her best navy coat and carried a plastic travel folder tucked beneath her arm. Every few minutes, she smiled to herself, as if she still couldn't believe she was finally going to see Paris. For 20 years she had saved carefully. Every spare dollar. Every tax refund. Every sacrifice. This trip was supposed to be her reward. One by one, family members stepped forward to receive their boarding passes. My father, my stepmother, my aunt, my cousins.
me.
Then the airline employee looked at her screen and frowned. Can you repeat the passenger's name? Hazel Farrell. My grandmother answered politely. The employee typed again. Then again. A longer pause followed. I'm sorry, ma'am, she finally said. I don't see a reservation under that name. My grandmother blinked. There must be some mistake. The employee searched again. Nothing. Hazel slowly opened her travel folder and removed her itinerary. Hotel names. Travel dates. Flight information. Everything looked official. Except for one thing. There was no confirmation number. No ticket number. No reservation code. My stomach tightened. Grandma turned toward my father. He barely glanced at the papers before shrugging. Oh no, he said casually. I must have forgotten to book your ticket. The words hung in the air. Forgotten. As if she were an afterthought. As if she hadn't contributed thousands of dollars for this vacation. Then he said something that made the entire terminal fall silent. Just go home, Mom. And in that moment, none of us realized that a single sentence was about to destroy everything he had spent years building. What happened next forced me to choose between my family and my conscience, and before that morning ended, I would make a decision that changed all of our lives forever. The airport seemed strangely quiet after my father's words. Just go home, Mom. Nobody argued. Nobody objected. Not my aunt. Not my stepmother. Not even my cousins. My grandmother stood there holding her travel folder, while strangers watched the scene unfold around us. The airline employee looked uncomfortable. An older couple nearby exchanged glances. But my family acted as if nothing unusual had happened. Hazel carefully slid the papers back into her folder. Her hands trembled slightly. Her face didn't. That somehow made it worse. My father adjusted the strap of his carry-on. We should get moving, he said. Boarding starts soon. As if his 74-year-old mother hadn't just discovered she had no ticket. As if she hadn't contributed thousands of dollars toward the trip. As if she didn't matter. The family began moving toward security. One by one. Without looking back. I stared at the boarding pass in my hand.
Rome.
Seat 18A. 3 weeks in Europe. Everything I had been excited about. Then I looked at Grandma. She was standing alone beside her old suitcase. Completely abandoned. Something inside me snapped. I folded my boarding pass in half. Then again. Then I tore it straight down the middle. The sound made my father turn around. What are you doing? I'm not going. He frowned. Don't be ridiculous. I'm taking Grandma home. My stepmother rolled her eyes. Joanna, don't create drama. Drama. The word echoed in my head. Leaving an elderly woman behind wasn't drama. Standing beside her apparently was. I picked up Grandpa's old suitcase. It felt heavier than it should have. Maybe because it contained more than clothes. It carried months of excitement. Dreams.
Hope.
All packed for a journey she would never take. At least that's what my father believed. Grandma touched my arm gently. You don't have to do this. Yes, I said quietly. I do. Together we walked away from the gate. Nobody followed. Nobody stopped us. And that silence told me more about my family than words ever could. By the time we reached Grandma's house, I was beginning to notice things that didn't make sense, and they would soon lead me to a secret someone had been hiding for years. The drive home took nearly an hour. Most of it passed in silence. Grandma stared out the passenger window while winter fields rolled past outside. I kept replaying the airport scene in my mind. The more I thought about it, the less it felt like a mistake. Something about my father's reaction bothered me. He hadn't looked surprised. He hadn't looked worried. He had looked prepared. When we arrived at Grandma's house, I carried her suitcase inside. The familiar home looked exactly as I remembered. At first. Then I started noticing details. The porch railing was loose. The kitchen faucet dripped constantly. The carpet near the hallway had worn thin. The furnace rattled loudly whenever it started. This didn't make sense. My grandmother had always been careful with money. She had spent decades saving. Yet her home looked neglected. That evening I opened the refrigerator while making tea. There wasn't much inside. A carton of eggs. Milk. A few leftovers. Nothing more. Later I glanced at the thermostat. 62 degrees. The house felt cold enough to wear a sweater indoors. Grandma, why keep it so low? She smiled. Saves money. The answer bothered me. Why would someone who had contributed thousands toward a European vacation be worried about heating costs? Before bed, I noticed something else. Her medications. Generic versions. The cheaper alternatives. Again and again. Small details kept pointing in the same direction. Someone who should have been comfortable was living like every dollar mattered. That night, I barely slept. Questions kept circling my mind. Had my father really forgotten her ticket? Or had something else happened? The next morning, I would start looking for answers. And once I started, there would be no turning back. The first clue arrived from an unexpected source, a neighbor who had been watching my father's visits for years. The following afternoon, a knock sounded at the door. It was Loretta, Grandma's longtime neighbor. She carried a casserole dish, and the kind of expression people wear when they know more than they're saying. After Grandma went to rest, Loretta and I sat on the porch. Cold air drifted through the neighborhood. Christmas decorations hung from several houses. For a few minutes we talked casually. Then Loretta lowered her voice. I've been worried about Hazel. I turned toward her. What do you mean? She hesitated. Things changed a couple years ago. That got my attention. Loretta explained that Grandma used to go out regularly with friends from church. Then suddenly she stopped. She stopped eating at restaurants. Stopped attending social gatherings. Stopped spending money altogether. She kept saying she couldn't afford it. I frowned. That didn't fit the picture I'd always been given. Then Loretta mentioned my father. He comes every couple weeks. To help her? Not exactly. Loretta looked toward the mailbox. He takes her mail. I blinked. What? He pulls up, grabs everything from the box, and leaves. Doesn't come inside? Usually not. A chill ran through me. My father had always claimed he checked on Grandma regularly. But according to Loretta, most visits lasted only a few minutes. Just enough time to collect the mail. Nothing more. The conversation ended shortly afterward, but the damage was done. For the first time, I felt genuine suspicion. When I went back inside, I stood staring at the mailbox through the kitchen window. Why would someone collect another person's mail for years? What was he trying to see? Or prevent her from seeing? That night, I began searching through old files and documents stored inside the house. And hidden among them, I found something that changed everything. Buried inside a filing cabinet was a legal document that gave my father more power than I ever imagined. The filing cabinet sat in the spare bedroom. Old. Scratched. Forgettable. Exactly the kind of place people overlook. I spent nearly an hour sorting through folders. Medical records. Tax forms. Insurance papers. Then I found a folder labeled Personal. Inside was a document stamped and notarized several years earlier. A durable power of attorney. I read every page carefully. Then I read it again. The document granted my father broad authority over Grandma's finances. Bank accounts. Investments. Insurance policies. Financial decisions. Everything. At first glance, it seemed reasonable. Many elderly parents appoint trusted family members to help manage affairs. But one detail stood out. The powers were extensive, far more extensive than I expected. Grandma appeared in the doorway while I was reading. Richard said it would make things easier. She spoke casually, as though it were no big deal. I asked a simple question. Do you know how much money you have in your accounts? She paused, then shook her head. Richard handles all that. My stomach tightened. What about your bank statements? He takes care of those too. The answer hit me harder than it should have. A woman who had spent decades building her savings no longer knew how much she owned. Someone else controlled everything. Someone who had just abandoned her at an airport. I carefully placed the document back into the folder. My mind was racing. Individually, each clue could be explained. The missing ticket, the cold house, the disappearing mail, the financial control. But together they formed a picture I didn't like. A very dangerous picture. That night, after Grandma went to sleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The old clock ticked steadily on the wall. I stared at my phone. Then I made a decision. The next morning, I was taking Grandma to the bank. And deep down, I already knew we weren't going to like what we found there. The bank manager would reveal a number so shocking that it left both of us speechless, and proved the story was far bigger than a forgotten plane ticket. Grandma sat quietly at the kitchen table while I poured coffee. Neither of us mentioned the filing cabinet. Neither of us mentioned my father. But both of us were thinking about the same thing. The bank. When I finally asked if she wanted to go, she hesitated. For a moment, I thought she would refuse. Then she stood up. Let's see what they have to say. The drive into town was short. The bank sat on the same corner where it had stood for decades. Grandma had been a customer there longer than I had been alive. Inside, the branch manager greeted her warmly. At first, everything seemed normal. Then she pulled up Grandma's accounts. The smile disappeared. A few minutes later, we were sitting in a private office. The manager turned her monitor toward us. Mrs. Farrell, are you aware of the recent activity on your accounts? Grandma looked confused. What activity? The manager clicked a few keys. Rows of transactions filled the screen. Withdrawals, transfers, payments, hundreds of entries, some small, some enormous. The manager's expression became increasingly uncomfortable. I felt my pulse quicken. Grandma leaned forward. What am I looking at? The answer would change everything. Because within minutes we would learn that the money she had spent decades saving was no longer where it was supposed to be. And someone we trusted completely had authorized every single transaction. The account balance that appeared on the screen left Grandma speechless for the first time in my life. The bank manager printed several pages and placed them carefully on the desk. Then she pointed to a number near the top. Grandma adjusted her glasses. I watched her eyes widen. 5 years earlier, her retirement account had contained over $200,000. Now, less than $50,000 remained. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The number felt impossible. Grandma stared at it, then looked again, as if another glance might change it. It has to be wrong. The manager shook her head gently. I'm afraid it isn't. I began scanning the transaction history. Thousands withdrawn here, several thousand there. Large transfers listed as repairs, medical expenses, maintenance costs, investment management. The descriptions sounded legitimate, but something felt off. Many of the expenses didn't match reality. The house clearly hadn't received major repairs. Grandma's insurance had covered most of her medical bills, and there was no sign of any investment account. Then I reached a transaction from only weeks earlier. $30,000. Travel fund. My stomach dropped. That was the money Grandma had contributed for the Europe trip. The same trip she never boarded. The manager pointed to the authorization record. Every major transaction carried the same name. Richard Farrell. My father. The room became unbearably quiet. Grandma folded the papers slowly, carefully, methodically. Then she placed them inside her purse. No tears. No shouting. No anger. Just silence. And somehow that hurt more. Because for the first time, she was beginning to understand what had really happened. The drive home was silent, but that evening Grandma finally asked a question neither of us was prepared to answer. We didn't speak much during the drive home. Grandma stared out the passenger window while the bank documents rested on her lap. The papers looked ordinary, but they carried 5 years of hidden damage. When we arrived home, she walked directly into the kitchen. For several minutes, she stood there looking around. The dripping faucet, the worn flooring, the aging appliances, all the things she had delayed repairing to save money. Money she thought was still safely growing. Finally, she sat down. I worked 22 years for that savings account. Her voice was quiet. I sat across from her. She continued staring at the table. Every extra dollar went into it. The words hung heavily in the room. Then she looked up. Not angry.
Heartbroken.
I trusted him. There it was. The real wound. Not the money. Not the airport.
Trust.
A mother believing her son would protect her interests. Instead, he had quietly taken control of them. That night, she skipped dinner. I ate alone at the kitchen table while studying transaction records. Page after page revealed the same pattern. Withdrawals, transfers, excuses, repeated over years. The evidence kept growing. Around 11 o'clock, Grandma finally emerged from her room. She sat across from me, looked at the documents, then looked at me. Can we fix this? I nodded. Yes. For the first time since the airport, I saw a small spark of determination in her eyes. And from that moment forward, we stopped being victims. We became investigators. The next day, we started gathering evidence, and one phone call revealed an even bigger secret. The following morning, I began making calls. Hours passed. Most of them led nowhere. Then one conversation changed everything. A representative confirmed that Grandma's retirement income deposits had been redirected multiple times over the years. The details were limited. Privacy laws prevented them from sharing everything. But one fact stood out. Changes had been made repeatedly. Changes Grandma knew nothing about. By lunchtime, I had a notebook full of questions. That afternoon, I returned to the filing cabinet. This time I searched more carefully. Every folder, every envelope, every drawer. I photographed documents, made copies, created timelines. The picture becoming visible wasn't pretty. Someone had systematically positioned themselves between Grandma and her finances.
Mail.
Accounts, statements, notifications. Everything flowed through one person. My father. The realization hit me hard. This wasn't one bad decision. It wasn't a forgotten ticket. It wasn't even a single theft. It looked planned, controlled, calculated. For years. Late that evening, I organized all the documents into neat piles across the dining table. Grandma watched quietly. Do you think Richard meant to hurt me? The question lingered in the air. I didn't know how to answer. Because intentions mattered less than actions. And the actions were already speaking loudly. Still, we were missing something. A piece of evidence that could prove what had really happened. Neither of us knew it yet. But that evidence was already sitting inside an old computer in the spare bedroom, waiting to be discovered. What I found on that computer would destroy my father's biggest lie and prove the airport incident was never an accident. The spare bedroom contained an aging desktop computer. It hummed loudly when it started. Most people would have ignored it. I almost did. Then curiosity won. The computer still had access to the family email account my father managed. I opened the inbox. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Travel confirmations, family messages, receipts. Then I searched for emails related to the Europe trip. Hundreds appeared. I opened them one by one. An hour passed. Then suddenly I found it. An email sent months before departure. My father was the sender. My aunt was the recipient. I read the message once, then again, then a third time. Each reading made me feel sicker. The message discussed travel arrangements. And buried in the middle was a sentence that changed everything. Don't book Mom's ticket. We'll handle it. I froze. My heart pounded. There it was. Proof. The ticket had never been forgotten. It had never existed. The plan was intentional from the beginning. Another email revealed upgrades to luxury seats, paid using funds linked to Grandma's account. Money she believed was helping her join the trip. Instead, it had funded comfort for everyone else. I printed everything. Every receipt, every email, every confirmation, then copied the files onto a flash drive. When I finally shut down the computer, the room felt different. The mystery was gone. The truth was standing directly in front of us. And the truth was ugly. The next morning I would contact an attorney, because this was no longer a family disagreement. It was something much bigger. Something that could end in court. When the attorney reviewed the evidence, his first words made it clear just how serious the situation had become. The next morning, I called the most experienced elder law attorney I could find. His name was Marcus Webb. By noon, Grandma and I were sitting across from him in a quiet office overlooking downtown Knoxville. The evidence sat neatly organized on his desk. Bank statements, the power of attorney document, transaction histories, the emails I had printed, the fake travel itinerary. Marcus spent nearly 30 minutes reading without saying a word. The silence was unnerving. Grandma sat beside me with both hands folded in her lap. Finally, Marcus removed his glasses. "What you've brought me is serious." I felt my stomach tighten. "How serious?" He tapped the stack of documents. "This isn't a misunderstanding." He paused. "This appears to be financial exploitation." The room went silent. Even Grandma stopped breathing for a moment. Marcus explained how people entrusted with power of attorney have a legal duty to act in the best interests of the person they represent. The evidence suggested something very different had happened. Then he reached the email, the one discussing Grandma's ticket. His expression hardened. He didn't forget. "No," I said quietly.
He didn't.
Marcus nodded. The airport incident wasn't a mistake. It was the final step in a plan. Grandma stared at the floor. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Marcus leaned forward. "We can stop this." It was the first hopeful thing anyone had said in days. And for the first time, I saw determination replace heartbreak in Grandma's eyes. But Marcus wasn't finished. Because before we left his office, he revealed a discovery that shocked even him. A hidden change buried in Grandma's financial records proved my father had been planning far beyond the Europe trip. Marcus spent another hour reviewing records. Then he opened an insurance document. His eyebrows lifted. "Mrs. Farrell, did you recently change your life insurance beneficiary?" Grandma looked confused.
No.
Marcus turned the screen toward us. The beneficiary designation had been modified 18 months earlier. The new primary beneficiary? Richard Farrell. My father. Grandma stared at the document. "I never signed that." The room suddenly felt smaller. Until that moment, we believed the missing money was the whole story. It wasn't. Someone had also positioned himself to inherit even more. Marcus immediately added the document to the growing case file. By the end of the meeting, the evidence binder had doubled in size. Emails, transfers, financial records, insurance changes. Everything pointed in the same direction. Before we left, Marcus outlined a plan. Emergency petition, account protections, formal investigation, possible civil recovery. Grandma listened carefully, then asked a simple question. "Can I get control of my own money back?" Marcus smiled. "Yes." For the first time since the airport, hope entered the room. But while we were building a legal case in Tennessee, the rest of the family was still enjoying Europe. And they had absolutely no idea what was happening back home. While my father posed for vacation photos in Rome, the first legal move against him was already underway. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Within days, Marcus filed emergency motions designed to protect Grandma's assets. Every document was carefully prepared. Every statement supported by evidence. Grandma signed everything at her kitchen table. The same table where she had hosted family holidays for decades. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Soon afterward, the bank received court filings. The response was immediate. Restrictions were placed on the accounts. Transfers were halted. Access permissions were reviewed. Most importantly, Grandma regained direct authority over her finances. For the first time in years, she held the new account paperwork in her hands and smiled. A small smile, but a real one. That evening we celebrated with takeout and coffee. Nothing fancy, just relief. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, my father remained completely unaware. He was still sightseeing, still dining in expensive restaurants, still spending money connected to accounts he believed he controlled. Marcus warned us it wouldn't last. Eventually, he would notice. And when he did, he would panic. The only question was when. The answer arrived sooner than expected, because on the fourth day after the court filing, a bank card stopped working in Italy. And that single decline transaction changed everything. The first phone call from Europe arrived early the next morning, and my father sounded nothing like the confident man from the airport. The family group chat remained active throughout the trip. Every day brought new pictures, smiling faces, historic landmarks, luxury meals, vacation memories. Grandma rarely looked at them. I did. Not because I enjoyed them, because I was searching for clues. Then one morning, a new message appeared. A photo of my father standing in front of the Colosseum. The caption read, "Living the dream." I stared at the image. The irony was painful. At nearly the same moment, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed my father's name. I answered. His voice sounded tense. "Joanna, something's wrong." I leaned back in my chair. What happened? My card was declined. There it was. The first crack. He explained that several transactions had failed. The bank had refused authorization. Customer service wouldn't explain why. I listened quietly, then asked a simple question. "Did you call the bank?" Of course I called the bank. The irritation in his voice was obvious. They said my permissions changed. I looked toward Grandma, who was reading quietly in the living room. For years she had lived with uncertainty. Now he was getting his first taste of it. "I don't know what to tell you, Dad." The silence that followed was heavy. For the first time he sounded worried. Truly worried. And deep down I knew why. Because people only panic when they realize they're losing control. 24 hours later, my father booked an early flight home, and he wasn't coming back to apologize. The calls became constant. My father called me. He called Grandma. He called other relatives. Nobody gave him answers. With each conversation, his tone changed. Confusion became frustration. Frustration became anger. By the third day, he wasn't pretending anymore. He wanted access restored. Immediately, Grandma ignored most of the calls. She wasn't being cruel. She was protecting her peace. For years, she had been the one left in the dark. Now the situation was reversed. Late that evening, a message appeared on my phone. "I'm flying home." Just 3 words, but they carried a warning. He wasn't returning because he missed his mother. He wasn't returning because he felt guilty. He was returning because something threatened his control. I showed the message to Marcus. The attorney wasn't surprised. He knows something has changed. Should we be worried? Marcus shook his head.
No.
We have documentation. Still, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. This wasn't just another case. This was my family, my father, a man I had trusted my entire life. And soon he would be standing in Grandma's living room demanding answers. The evidence binder continued growing. Emails, statements, legal filings, everything neatly organized. Waiting. Because when my father finally walked through that front door, he was expecting a conversation. What he was actually walking into was a confrontation backed by proof. And he had no idea how much we knew. 3 days later, my father's truck pulled into Grandma's driveway, and the moment he saw the documents on the table, everything changed. 3 days later, my father's truck rolled into Grandma's driveway. I watched through the kitchen window as he stepped out. The tan from Europe was still visible, but the confidence he wore in those vacation photos was gone. He walked quickly toward the front door and entered without waiting to be invited. "Mom, we need to talk." Then he stopped. The dining table was covered with folders, bank statements, printed emails, legal documents, highlighted transaction records. His eyes moved across the evidence. "What is all this?" I remained seated. "Documentation." His jaw tightened. He looked at Grandma, then at me. then back at the folders. For the first time, uncertainty appeared on his face. "What have you been doing?" Grandma didn't answer immediately. She calmly sipped her tea. The silence unsettled him more than any argument could have. Finally, he pulled out a chair and sat down. His eyes never left the paperwork. I could almost see the calculations happening inside his head, trying to determine what we knew, trying to determine how much trouble he was in. The truth? He was about to discover that we knew far more than he imagined. And within minutes, his biggest source of protection would disappear completely. The next words spoken across that table turned my father's confidence into panic almost instantly. Dad leaned forward. "This is ridiculous. I have legal authority to manage Mom's finances." The room became very quiet. I glanced at Grandma. She nodded. It was time. "Had authority," I corrected. His expression froze. "What?" "Had authority." For a moment, he simply stared. Then I slid a document across the table. The court order. His eyes scanned the page. The color drained from his face.
No.
"It was approved 3 days ago." He read it again, then again, as if repetition might change the outcome. It didn't. The emergency order had suspended his power of attorney. Immediately. No more access. No more account control. No more decision-making authority. Everything had been returned to Grandma. He looked at her. "Mom, you did this?" Grandma set down her cup.
No.
She looked directly into his eyes. "You did." The words landed harder than any accusation. For the first time since arriving, he had no response. No excuse. No explanation. Just silence. Then anger began, replacing shock. And I realized the conversation was only getting started. Because the moment he understood control was gone, he became desperate to protect something else. The truth. Dad still believed he could explain away the missing money, but he didn't know we'd already uncovered the bank records. Dad pushed the court order aside. "This is all a misunderstanding." I opened the largest folder on the table. Inside were 5 years of transaction records. I placed them in front of him. "Then explain these." His eyes moved across the pages. Thousands withdrawn. Transfers. Account movements. Luxury purchases. Travel expenses. The evidence was overwhelming. Still, he tried. "I was managing her finances." Grandma spoke quietly. "Managing them where?" He looked at her. "Mom, you don't understand investments." That answer didn't help him. It made things worse. Because there were no investment accounts. No growth. No returns. Only disappearing money. I pointed to several transactions. Home repairs. Grandma's house was falling apart. Medical expenses. Insurance had covered most of them. Maintenance costs. No records existed. Each explanation collapsed under scrutiny. His voice grew louder. His arguments weaker. The more he spoke, the clearer the truth became. He wasn't explaining. He was scrambling. Then Grandma asked one question. A question that stopped him cold. "Where is my money, Richard?" Not where had it gone. Not why. Where is it now? For the first time, he had absolutely no answer. And things were about to become even worse. Because we hadn't shown him the emails yet. The evidence on the table was damaging enough, but the emails hidden inside an old computer would destroy every excuse he had left. Dad stood up and began pacing. The pressure was getting to him. I waited until he stopped moving. Then I opened another folder. This came from the family email account. His eyes narrowed. Immediately, he knew. I handed him the printed pages. The room became silent. He read the first message, then the second, then the third. The change in his expression was impossible to miss.
Panic.
Real panic. The email discussing Grandma's ticket sat near the top. The one proving she had never been booked onto the flight. The one proving the airport scene wasn't an accident. His hands trembled slightly. Grandma watched quietly. No anger. No shouting. Just disappointment. Somehow that seemed harder for him to face. My aunt's name appeared throughout the email chain as well. Planning. Coordinating. Discussing arrangements. The evidence painted a picture that could no longer be denied. Dad placed the papers on the table. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then he whispered something I never expected to hear. I didn't think she'd find out. The room froze. He realized what he'd said immediately. But it was too late. The sentence hung in the air. A confession hidden inside a mistake. And Grandma heard every word. What happened next broke Grandma's heart more than the missing money ever could. After the confession, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The house seemed unnaturally quiet. Finally, Grandma stood. Slowly, carefully. She walked to the end of the table and faced her son. Her voice remained calm, steady. The same voice she had used while teaching school children for decades. I trusted you. Dad lowered his eyes. I know. I signed those papers because I believed you wanted to help. He didn't answer. I defended you every time someone questioned you. Still nothing. Then she said the words that hurt the most. The money isn't what broke me. Dad looked up. The airport did. Silence filled the room. You left me standing there. Tears appeared in his eyes. But Grandma continued. You looked at me and told me to go home. The memory seemed to hit him harder than any legal document. For the first time, shame replaced anger. Real shame. Grandma took a deep breath. I don't hate you, Richard. That surprised everyone. Even him. But I can't trust you anymore. The sentence carried a finality that couldn't be argued away. The relationship that existed before the airport was gone. Maybe forever. Dad sat motionless. And for the first time since this began, he seemed to understand the true cost of what he'd done. But the story wasn't over. Not even close. Because while this confrontation was ending, the legal battle was only beginning. And the next person to arrive would bring consequences no one could avoid. 2 days later, official investigators became involved, and they arrived with questions my father couldn't escape. 2 days after the confrontation, a black sedan pulled into Grandma's driveway. I was helping her organize paperwork when we saw it through the front window. Neither of us needed to guess why they were there. Marcus had warned us this might happen. The investigation was officially underway. 2 investigators introduced themselves and spent the next several hours reviewing documents. Bank records, emails, insurance changes, power of attorney paperwork. Every piece of evidence we had gathered. The more they reviewed, the more serious their expressions became. Grandma answered every question honestly. Sometimes she struggled. Not because she couldn't remember, because remembering hurt. Every financial decision she thought had been made for her benefit now looked completely different. At one point, an investigator asked if she had personally approved several large withdrawals. Grandma looked down at the paperwork, then quietly shook her head.
No.
The answer was simple, but its implications were enormous. By late afternoon, the investigators had filled an entire folder with notes. Before leaving, one of them paused at the front door. We may need additional interviews. I knew exactly what that meant. The focus of the investigation was shifting. And the next person they wanted to speak with wasn't Grandma. It was my father. Meanwhile, Dad remained convinced he could still explain everything away. He had no idea how much evidence had already been collected. And he certainly didn't know that another family member was beginning to have second thoughts. While investigators reviewed the evidence, one of Dad's closest allies started questioning the story she had been told. The first unexpected phone call came from my cousin Emily. She sounded nervous. Joanna, can we talk? We met at a small coffee shop the next morning. Emily looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept much. After a few minutes of small talk, she leaned forward. Something doesn't make sense. I didn't interrupt. She continued. Dad and Aunt Diane told us Grandma didn't want to travel. That got my attention. What? Emily nodded. That's what we were told. My stomach tightened. For months, family members had apparently been given a completely different version of events. According to that story, Grandma wasn't interested in joining the trip. She supposedly preferred staying home. The truth couldn't have been more different. Emily looked genuinely shocked when I explained what happened at the airport. The missing ticket, the emails, the financial records. The silence that followed lasted nearly a minute. Finally, she spoke. They lied to us. I nodded. Slowly.
Sadly.
The realization hit her hard, because nobody likes discovering they've been used, especially by their own parents. Before leaving, Emily said something important. There are other people who deserve to know. She was right. The truth was spreading. And once people started comparing stories, the carefully constructed narrative Dad had relied on for years began falling apart. The next family conversation revealed a secret that made several relatives turn against Dad almost overnight. Marcus recommended a family meeting, not to argue, not to negotiate, to present facts. A week later, several relatives gathered at Grandma's house. The atmosphere was tense. Nobody knew exactly what would happen. Dad arrived late. Aunt Diane arrived shortly afterward. Neither looked happy. Marcus opened the meeting by distributing copies of the evidence. Nobody interrupted. Nobody argued. They simply read, one page after another. Emails, bank records, travel documents, court filings. The silence became increasingly uncomfortable. Then Emily spoke first. You told us Grandma didn't want to go. Dad avoided eye contact. Another cousin looked up. You said she refused the invitation. More silence. Aunt Diane shifted uneasily in her chair. The facts were impossible to ignore. The airport incident wasn't a misunderstanding. The missing ticket wasn't an accident. The story everyone had been told wasn't true. One by one, family members began asking questions. Hard questions. Questions Dad couldn't answer. The confidence he once carried was disappearing rapidly. For years, control over the narrative had protected him. Now the evidence was speaking louder than he could. And the evidence wasn't on his side. Just when Dad thought the meeting couldn't get worse, Marcus revealed a document nobody else had seen. Marcus waited until the room settled. Then he opened a separate folder. This is the last item. Everyone watched closely. The document appeared ordinary at first, but it contained a detailed timeline. Every major withdrawal, every account transfer, every significant financial change, organized year by year, side by side. The pattern was unmistakable. Money left Grandma's accounts. Luxury spending increased elsewhere. Travel expenses appeared. Personal purchases appeared. Repeatedly. Over several years. Marcus didn't accuse anyone. He didn't need to. The timeline spoke for itself. For the first time, several relatives visibly pulled away from Dad and Aunt Diane. Not physically. Emotionally. Trust was disappearing. And trust, once lost, is incredibly difficult to recover. Grandma remained quiet throughout the presentation. She didn't celebrate. She didn't look satisfied. She simply looked tired. Because proving the truth doesn't erase the pain that created it. When the meeting finally ended, relatives left one by one. The atmosphere was completely different from when they arrived. The family wasn't united anymore. The illusion had shattered. And Dad knew it. But he still had one final defense left. One last attempt to avoid responsibility. The next morning, Dad made an offer that stunned everyone and revealed exactly what he feared most. The phone rang early the next morning. It was Dad. He asked to meet privately. Against my better judgment, Grandma agreed. We met in her living room.
Dad looked exhausted.
The confident man from the airport was gone. In his place sat someone who knew consequences were approaching. After several minutes of awkward silence, he finally spoke. I can pay some of it back. The room became still. Grandma didn't respond. Dad continued. I don't want this going any further. There it was. The real reason for the meeting. Not remorse.
Fear.
He wasn't offering repayment because he suddenly understood the damage. He was offering repayment because he understood the risk. Investigators. Court filings. Evidence. Public records. Everything was becoming real. Grandma listened carefully, then asked a question. How much? Dad named a figure. It sounded large at first, until we compared it with the actual losses. It wasn't even close. Not remotely close. The offer represented only a fraction of what had disappeared. Marcus had warned us this might happen. An attempt at partial repayment. An attempt to minimize exposure. An attempt to stop the investigation. Grandma folded her hands calmly, then shook her head.
No.
Dad stared at her,
Shocked.
For years she had rarely challenged him. Now she wasn't backing down. Not anymore. The balance of power had completely changed. And for the first time, Dad realized he could no longer control what happened next. As the investigation intensified, new financial records surfaced, and they revealed where much of Grandma's missing money had actually gone. A week after Dad's failed offer, new financial records arrived. Marcus had obtained additional documentation through legal requests. The records filled an entire binder. I sat beside Grandma at the kitchen table while Marcus reviewed the findings. At first, the transactions looked ordinary. Then patterns began to emerge. Large withdrawals often appeared just before family vacations. Luxury purchases followed major account transfers. Hotel bookings, airline tickets, expensive electronics, restaurant charges, year after year. The timing. Aunt Diane had remained mostly quiet since the family meeting. She avoided phone calls, ignored messages, and declined invitations to discuss the case. Now we understood why. The financial records showed repeated transfers involving accounts connected to her. Not all of them were suspicious, but enough of them raised serious questions. Investigators requested explanations. Some were provided, many weren't. The timeline became increasingly difficult to defend. Several transactions occurred within hours of money leaving Grandma's accounts. Others matched purchases made during family trips. The explanations grew weaker with each review. When Marcus shared the findings with us, Grandma looked genuinely saddened. I trusted her too. It wasn't anger. It was heartbreak. For decades, Diane had been part of the family circle. Holiday dinners, birthdays, graduations, every major event. Now her name was appearing alongside transactions that should never have happened. A few days later, Diane finally called. She sounded nervous. For the first time, she wasn't speaking with confidence. She wanted to explain, wanted everyone to understand, wanted people to know she hadn't planned everything. But intentions mattered less than actions, and the records were becoming difficult to ignore. Meanwhile, investigators continued gathering evidence. Every new document added another piece to the puzzle, and that puzzle was beginning to look very complete. As pressure mounted, Diane made a decision that left Dad completely exposed. 3 weeks into the investigation, a major development occurred. Diane agreed to provide a formal statement. The news reached Dad almost immediately. His reaction was immediate panic, because he knew something everyone else was beginning to realize. Diane knew details. Lots of details. She had been present for conversations, travel planning, financial discussions, family decisions. She knew what had happened behind closed doors. When investigators met with her, the interview lasted several hours. Nobody told us everything that was discussed, but Marcus received enough information to understand the significance. The statement supported portions of the existing evidence. Important portions. The kind that strengthened a case. The kind that made alternative explanations harder to believe. For Dad, it was a disaster. His strategy had always relied on controlling the story. Now multiple people were describing events independently, and their accounts matched. Back at Grandma's house, the atmosphere felt different, lighter somehow. Not because the situation was improving, but because the truth was becoming harder to hide. For the first time, Grandma began discussing plans for the future. Home repairs, travel, community activities, things she had postponed for years. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was moving forward, and that worried Dad more than any legal filing ever could, because every step forward reduced his influence even further. Just when Dad thought things couldn't get worse, investigators uncovered a document he never expected anyone to find. The discovery happened almost by accident. While reviewing archived records, investigators found an old file connected to the power of attorney process. Inside were notes, correspondence, and supporting documents. Most were routine. One wasn't. The document contained written instructions related to account management and financial communication. What made it important wasn't what it said. It was what it contradicted. Several explanations Dad had previously offered no longer matched the timeline. The dates didn't fit. The records didn't align. The evidence was creating inconsistencies. And inconsistencies create problems, especially during investigations. Marcus carefully reviewed everything, then added the file to the growing evidence binder. At this point, the binder had become enormous. Years of records, dozens of statements, thousands of transactions. The case had expanded far beyond the airport incident. Yet, strangely, that moment still remained at the center of everything. Because the airport wasn't where the story started. It was where the truth finally became visible. And now the truth was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, preparations for potential court proceedings continued. The next phase would focus on accountability. And everyone involved knew it. A few days later, a settlement proposal arrived, but accepting it would require Grandma to make a difficult choice. The proposal arrived in a thick envelope. Dad's attorney had submitted it late Friday afternoon. Marcus reviewed it carefully before bringing it to Grandma. The offer was substantial, far larger than the first one. It included repayment commitments, asset transfers, financial concessions. On paper, it looked impressive, but there was a condition. The investigation would end. Future claims would be limited. Additional legal action would stop. Grandma listened quietly as Marcus explained everything. Then she asked for time to think. That evening we sat together on the back porch. The sun was setting. The neighborhood was peaceful. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked what she was thinking. She smiled softly. You know what's strange? What? For months, I thought this was about money. She looked out across the yard. Now I realize it's about respect. The answer stayed with me. Because she was right. The money mattered. But the deeper wound came from betrayal. From being treated as though she didn't matter. From being left behind. The settlement couldn't erase that. No amount of money could. Still, a decision had to be made. And whatever choice Grandma made next would shape the rest of the story. Because the investigation was approaching its most important stage yet. And soon everyone would learn exactly how far she was willing to go. Grandma's final decision shocked both attorneys and set the stage for the most dramatic chapter of the entire case. The following Monday, Grandma made her choice. Marcus sat across from her in the living room while the settlement documents rested on the coffee table. The offer remained generous. More generous than many people expected. It would recover a large portion of the missing funds, avoid a lengthy legal battle, bring the matter to a quicker conclusion. But Grandma wasn't focused on the money. She had already made that clear. Marcus reviewed the proposal one final time, then looked at her. Are you sure? Grandma nodded. Yes. She wasn't rejecting the settlement entirely. She was rejecting the conditions attached to it. She refused to sign anything that prevented the truth from being fully documented. For years, decisions had been made without her knowledge. Now she wanted transparency. Nothing hidden. Nothing buried. Nothing quietly forgotten. The response surprised everyone, including Dad's legal team. They had expected her to prioritize a quick resolution. Instead, she prioritized accountability. When Marcus delivered her decision, negotiations immediately became more complicated. The pressure increased. Deadlines approached. Investigators continued their work. And for the first time, it became clear that the case might proceed much further than anyone originally expected. Meanwhile, family members began reaching out to Grandma more frequently. Not because of the money, because they finally understood what had happened. Relationships damaged by misinformation were slowly beginning to heal. Trust wasn't fully restored, but conversations had started, and that mattered. Yet while the family was moving toward understanding, Dad was moving in the opposite direction. The stress was beginning to show, and soon it would force him into a decision he could no longer avoid. Faced with mounting evidence and growing pressure, Dad finally agreed to do something he had resisted for months. The meeting was arranged quietly. No investigators. No extended family. Just Marcus, Grandma, Dad, and me. The atmosphere felt heavy from the moment Dad entered the room. He looked exhausted. Older somehow. As though the past few months had aged him years. Nobody spoke at first. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "This is your opportunity to address what's happened." Dad stared at the table. For a long moment, I wasn't sure he would say anything. Then he spoke. Not loudly, not defensively, quietly. "I made mistakes." The words hung in the air. Grandma listened without interruption. Dad admitted making financial decisions he shouldn't have made. Admitted failing to communicate honestly. Admitted that the airport incident should never have happened. He didn't provide excuses.
At least, not this time.
And that alone felt different. For the first time, he wasn't trying to control the narrative. He was acknowledging reality. The conversation lasted nearly 3 hours. Some questions were answered. Others weren't. But when it ended, everyone understood one thing. The denial phase was over. The facts had become too overwhelming to ignore. Dad finally stood to leave. Before reaching the door, he turned toward Grandma. "I never thought it would end like this." Grandma looked at him calmly. "Neither did I." The sadness in her voice filled the room. Because despite everything, this wasn't a victory.
It was a family tragedy.
And there were still consequences ahead. A few weeks later, the official findings were completed, and they confirmed everything Grandma had feared. The investigation had taken months. Thousands of pages of records had been reviewed, dozens of interviews conducted, financial transactions analyzed. Now the findings were complete. Marcus received the report first, then scheduled a meeting with Grandma. I accompanied her. The report wasn't dramatic. No shocking surprises remained. In many ways, that was the point. The investigation confirmed what the evidence had already suggested. Financial authority had been misused. Records had been mishandled. Funds had been directed in ways that were inconsistent with Grandma's interests. The conclusions were detailed, professional,
Difficult to dispute.
Grandma listened carefully as Marcus summarized the results. She remained calm, far calmer than I expected. After everything she'd endured, perhaps she was simply tired of being surprised. When the meeting ended, Marcus handed her a copy of the report. She placed it inside her bag, then stood. "Let's go home." That was it. No celebration, no dramatic reaction, just acceptance. The truth had finally been documented, officially, permanently, and that mattered. Because years from now, nobody would be able to rewrite the story. The record would remain. The facts would remain. The truth would remain. But one final chapter still needed to be written. The chapter about what happened next. As the legal process neared its conclusion, Grandma made plans that nobody saw coming. Spring arrived. For the first time in years, Grandma seemed genuinely happy. Not because everything was fixed, because she finally felt free. The repairs she'd postponed were completed. The furnace was replaced. The leaking faucet was repaired. The worn carpet disappeared. Small changes, but meaningful ones. She also reconnected with friends she'd gradually stopped seeing. Lunches returned. Church activities returned. Community events returned. Piece by piece, her old life came back. One afternoon, I found her studying travel brochures at the kitchen table. I smiled. "Planning something?"
She grinned.
"Maybe." The answer surprised me. Months earlier, the thought of traveling again seemed impossible. Now she was considering it, not because someone invited her, because she wanted to go. The difference was important. For years, decisions had been made for her. Now she was making her own. And every decision seemed to restore a little more confidence. Watching that transformation was remarkable. The woman abandoned at an airport had become someone entirely different. Stronger, more independent, more certain of her own value. The experience had cost her dearly, but it hadn't defeated her. And soon she would make one final decision that brought the story full circle. When Grandma revealed her travel plans, nobody could believe the destination she had chosen. It happened during Sunday dinner. Several family members had gathered at Grandma's house. The atmosphere felt completely different from the tense meetings of the previous year. Conversations were relaxed. Laughter returned. Healing had begun. Not perfectly, not completely, but it had begun. Halfway through dessert, Grandma stood and tapped her glass gently. Everyone looked up. I have an announcement. Smiles spread around the room. Nobody knew what to expect. Then she placed 2 airline tickets on the table. For a moment, nobody understood. Then I saw the destination.
Paris.
The room erupted.
People laughed.
People cheered. A few people cried, including me. Grandma looked happier than I had seen her in years. I'm finally going. The words carried enormous meaning, not because of the destination, because of what it represented. She wasn't waiting for permission, wasn't depending on anyone else's plans, wasn't allowing past disappointments to define her future. She was reclaiming something that had been taken from her.
Choice.
Freedom.
Dignity.
The trip would happen later that summer. And this time, every ticket had been personally verified. More importantly, every decision belonged to her. As dinner continued, I looked around the room. The past couldn't be changed, but the future could. And for the first time since that morning at the airport, the future looked bright. The final chapter wasn't about courtrooms or investigations. It was about what happened when Grandma finally stood beneath the Eiffel Tower and realized just how far she had come. Summer arrived faster than any of us expected. For months, Paris had been little more than a dream postponed by betrayal and disappointment. Now it was becoming reality. Grandma approached the trip differently this time. Every reservation was made personally. Every confirmation number was printed and stored in a folder she carried everywhere. Every flight detail was checked twice, then checked again. Nobody blamed her. On the morning of departure, I drove her to the airport. Ironically, it was the same airport where everything had fallen apart nearly a year earlier. As we walked through the terminal, I noticed her looking around. Not nervously, thoughtfully. The memories were still there. The humiliation, the confusion, the heartbreak. But they no longer controlled her. When we reached the airline counter, she handed over her passport. The employee smiled. "Mrs. Farrell, everything is confirmed. You're all set." For a second, Grandma simply stood there. Then she smiled. A genuine smile. The kind I hadn't seen in a very long time. As we headed toward security, she squeezed my hand. "You know something?" "What?" "I'm actually excited again." That simple sentence meant everything. Because after everything she'd endured, she had chosen hope over fear. Many people never recover from betrayal. Grandma did. Not because she forgot what happened, because she refused to let it define her future. Soon the boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. This time, there was no missing ticket, no deception, no disappointment, just a journey waiting to begin. And as she disappeared through the gate, I realized this trip wasn't really about Paris anymore.
It was about freedom.
2 days later, a photo arrived from France, and it captured a moment none of us will ever forget. The text message arrived just after sunrise. It contained a single photograph. Grandma stood beneath the Eiffel Tower. Behind her, the Paris skyline stretched into the distance. But it wasn't the location that caught my attention. It was her expression. She looked joyful, completely joyful, not relieved, not satisfied,
happy.
For months, her life had revolved around investigations, court filings, and painful family conversations. Now she was simply a traveler enjoying a beautiful city. Later that evening, we spoke through a video call. She couldn't stop smiling. She described everything: the cafes, the museums, the river cruises, the historic streets. Every detail seemed magical. Then she told me something I never forgot. "When I first lost this trip, I thought I'd lost something important. You didn't." "I know that now." She paused. "I found something better."
"What?"
"My confidence." The answer stayed with me, because she was right. Paris wasn't the victory. Her recovery was. The city was simply the destination. The real journey had happened long before she boarded the plane. Meanwhile, back home, life continued moving forward. The legal matters were nearly resolved. The investigations were ending, and everyone involved was beginning to accept the consequences. But one final conversation still remained. A conversation between a mother and a son. Before returning home, Grandma made one unexpected phone call, and the person who answered wasn't prepared for what she had to say. Dad answered on the second ring. Grandma was sitting at a small cafe overlooking the Seine River when she called. At first, neither spoke. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Dad broke it. "How's Paris?" Grandma smiled softly. "It's beautiful." Another pause followed. Then Dad surprised her. "I'm glad you made it there." For the first time in months, there was no argument. No accusations. No defenses. Just honesty. They talked for nearly 20 minutes. Not about money. Not about investigations. Not about court documents. They talked about life. About family. About mistakes. Dad apologized again. This time, there were no attorneys present. No audience. No strategy. Just a son speaking to his mother. The apology didn't erase the past. Nothing could, but it mattered. Because accountability means more when it happens willingly. Before ending the call, Grandma said something remarkable. "I forgive you." Dad didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "Thank you." Forgiveness wasn't the same as trust. The relationship would take years to rebuild. Maybe longer. But for the first time, rebuilding seemed possible. And sometimes that's enough. When Grandma returned home, she discovered that her journey had inspired changes throughout the entire family. When Grandma returned from Paris, something unexpected had happened. The family had changed. Not completely, not perfectly, but noticeably. People communicated more openly. Financial matters became more transparent. Important decisions were discussed rather than assumed. The experience had forced everyone to examine uncomfortable truths. Some relationships grew stronger. Others remained strained. But nobody could pretend the past hadn't happened. And strangely enough, that honesty improved things. One evening, several family members gathered at Grandma's house. The conversation eventually turned to everything that had happened. Someone asked if she regretted pursuing the truth. Grandma thought carefully before answering.
No.
The room grew quiet. "I regret what happened." She looked around the table. "But I don't regret standing up for myself." The statement carried weight. Because for years she had remained silent. Not anymore. Her experience became a lesson for everyone present. Trust matters. Transparency matters. Respect matters. And family relationships cannot survive without them. As the evening continued, stories were shared. Laughter returned. New memories replaced old wounds. Not completely, but gradually. Healing had begun. And that healing led directly to the final chapter of the story. Years later, one small item displayed in Grandma's living room would remind everyone of the journey that changed her life forever. Several years later, I visited Grandma on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Her home looked completely different. The repairs were finished. The rooms felt warm and welcoming. Photos from Paris decorated the walls. But one item always captured visitors' attention. A framed airline ticket. It hung near the front entrance. Simple, unassuming, yet incredibly meaningful. Most people assumed it was a souvenir. It wasn't. It was a reminder of the day everything changed. The day she was left behind. The day she discovered the truth. And the day she began reclaiming her life. Whenever visitors asked about it, Grandma would smile. Then tell them a shortened version of the story. Not with bitterness. Not with anger. With gratitude. Because the experience had taught her something important. A person's worth is not determined by how others treat them. It's determined by how they respond when they are treated unfairly. Grandma could have accepted what happened. She could have remained silent. She could have allowed disappointment to define her future. Instead, she chose courage. She chose truth. And eventually she chose healing. As I prepared to leave that afternoon, I glanced at the framed ticket one final time. The symbol no longer represented loss. It represented resilience. The trip to Paris had lasted only a few weeks, but the lessons from the journey lasted a lifetime. And if there's one thing Grandma's story proved, it's this. Sometimes the worst day of your life becomes the first day of a better one.
Subscribe for more amazing content like this.